Okay, if you got an old air-cooled VW or Porsche, for example, this is a 1973 914 2.0. As these things age, you develop a little bit of resistance in the wiring, and sometimes you may notice when the car is warm, it may not want to start. You turn the key and you might hear a click, but that's about it. Generally, that's attributed to the resistance in the wiring, because even though your battery cable goes from the battery directly to the starter, it picks up voltage there. It goes all the way through the car to the ignition switch and then back to the starter, which when you turn the ignition switch, that triggers the starter to engage the solenoid and start the engine. And you get a voltage drop between that starter through the ignition and back to the starter again. So there is a quick fix for that. And what I did is I pulled my starter assembly out. You can see that I've got some battery cables. I'm actually hooked up to the battery in my car. And what I did was I pulled the starter out. I tested it on the bench directly through the jumper cables, and it worked fine. It had enough power to kick the solenoid out and turn the motor over. So I know that the battery connections and everything are good there. We're suffering a voltage drop. So went down to AutoZone today. You can get these anywhere. This is an F496 starter solenoid. These were popular on early model Fords. If you know anything about Fords and you looked under the dash, you might have seen something, or under the hood, you might have seen something like this under the hood. So what I've done is I basically set it up. I'm going to tell you how to wire this. And if you have the problem, you can easily install one of these yourself. So I think this particular part was like $18 and change. Now, it's real simple. This is your 12 volt terminal from the battery. This cable here represents the battery cable, because obviously it's out of the car. So what we've done is we've hooked up here. We've got our 12 volts here. This would normally be your ignition wire coming from your key. You'll see a yellow wire there. What we do is we will remove this wire for this installation. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to take this solenoid. This must be grounded. So you must mount this to a metal portion of the car that is grounded. For my installation purposes, I believe I'm going to use the rear shroud, and hopefully I've got a good enough ground there. Real simple. We're going to take a wire we're going to leave our battery cables, all our other cables and stuff hooked down here. We're going to take this cable, which you could use a number 10. The reason I didn't was because I found this cable, which is 19 inches long. It's more of a battery cable meant for a lawnmower or golf cart or anything like that. But it was about half the price of a small roll of number 10 wire. And then plus you would have had to have the terminals on top of that. So we use this particular cable. We go from here into the left side post of the solenoid. We'll take a number 12 wire, put the solderless terminals on it, come back and go to where the old ignition wire went. Then we'll take that ignition wire, which also had 12 volts coming through it, which I'm picking up here, and we'll change the connector to put an I connector on and connect it to this terminal here. Now most of these, I don't know if you can see it here, but there's an I right here, there's an S right here. The S means that this goes to the starter. This terminal is almost never used. So if we are connected correctly, we go through here, and what happens is, what this relay does is when we send 12 volts to this, instead of going all the way through the car and back to the starter, it sends voltage directly across these two terminals, so that we lose all that intermediate wire and we get a solid 12 volts at the starter and more amperage. So this device here is just a click starter. We use these for turning engines over. This will designate the power coming from the key. So if I press this and the starter works, the solenoid's in right. Here we go. So obviously you can see we've got the torque there. That should take care of our problem right there. I'll try to get some pictures underneath of how I mounted it, and that should help you in the future. Now I know it's hard to see under here because there's not much light. Let's see if this helps any. Ouch, it's kind of hot. Okay, you can see there's the starter. The wires are hooked up to the starter. We mounted the solenoid to the back of the shroud that goes up over the bell housing of the engine, you know, and to seal off the engine compartment. Okay, you can see where we moved the starter wire over, original ignition wire over to the front, to the S marking, hooked up our battery cables, and ran it to the starter. Okay, now that I've climbed out from underneath there, I've got the air cleaner back. The bolts are down here. Kind of hard to see them, but they're in behind some hoses there. So be careful when you drill through. You don't want to hit any hoses or wiring. So everything's buckled up, back together. Battery connections are back together. Car's in neutral. And if I did everything right, we should be able to turn the key and bingo, it starts.